Well, now let's turn to another person that helps us quite a bit on the show, Mike Tylick. Mike is an OM30 modeler who does some beautiful work. And Mike, we're looking forward to your presentation this evening.
Today I'm going to talk about Scituate Harbor, which was part of the last section of my model railroad. This is Scituate Harbor. Now, there really is a Scituate Harbor. It's the next town over from me, and it's by the ocean. It does have a harbor with lots of fishing boats. And actually, a novel was written about it once where there's this lady, my daughter-in-law knows, who lives in Kansas, who's dying to go there someday, but it's just a plain old town. To my knowledge, there was never a railroad in Scituate Harbor, not even a trolley line. But I shouldn't dwell on that too much. But I'm just going to show you some construction photos and a couple of finished photos. Now, what I ended up doing for the scenery, I gotten more and more to using woven strips as a base. I never really liked styrofoam foam scenery. I never liked the subtractive method of cutting it away. I like crumbled newspapers, but my friend Steve Morrow got me started with this, and it's cheap and it's easy. And I don't really read the newspaper anymore, so I don't get newspapers, but I get lots of boxes from Amazon. But here we are with the strips and some track light. Okay, now there's some hard shell. What I tend to do is I like the old-fashioned hard shell. I get some industrial paper towels, and usually you can just good place to get them if you could buy packages, but if you can't find them, just go to some diner and go in the bathroom and pull out a couple of dozen each time, and you'll have a bunch before you know it. But anyway, I like the hard shell with the plaster. I use sealing plaster. Years ago, before I could find hydrocal in reasonable quantities, someone suggested sealing plaster. It works beautifully, and I've used it ever since. And anyway, then there's one there which is all white. The one on the left is all white. And then right away, I kind of color it. I kind of stain it. When Lynn Westcott's idea, where you take thin plaster and you stipple it on the rock, and it makes a very presentable rock. You throw some dirt on it and some ground cover, and you have a very basic scenery. It looks like something, and it never photographs well for some reason in this state, but there it is. One important thing I found: before you do any scenery work, cover everything with blue tape. Okay, and blue tape works beautifully. Years ago, I built a railroad and I covered it with masking tape. And if you've ever left masking tape on for more than 2 or 3 days, you know it never comes off. So the blue tape is wonderful for this, and make sure you protect everything. If you rip it off, you put blue tape. I could go into hours on how I built it, but here's one of the little details I did. I wanted to have a walkway. I have a beach. By the way, this is real beach sand. It's kind of coarse, but the beaches where I live are more rocky than I like. So it kind of fits the beaches in the South Shore of Massachusetts. So I got some real sand, and I took a pipe for a culvert. You need a walkway. You have to get down to the beach, and there's always these kind of precarious roads to go down there. So what I did is I put the pipe, that piece of cardboard, just oak tag I call it, to kind of define the stone wall, and then I glued stones on and textured it, because you always need things. And seems that the beach is always it always seems like you get to the beach, and I don't live far from the beach, but it's always a long walk from the time you get out of your car to get to the beach. You know, it's always a long walk, and it's always uphill or downhill. It's like you're in the Marines and you're slogging in the sand with a backpack and all this stuff, but it's there. Now, one thing they have where I live, and this is near where Marshfield, the town I live in, separates from Scituate. There are these old stone causeways the railroad built. There was a railroad. There was a railroad in Scituate, but not in Scituate Harbor. Harbor's a couple miles off. And what I did is I took some rocks. These are from the outside patio, and I just glued them in place. They're perfect for O scale. They're kind of jagged. They're big rocks. If you went to some of these oceanside causeways, you wonder how they ever moved the rocks there. Some of the rocks are the size of automobiles, and you just wonder how they did that in the 19th century or what they used. I mean, well, I guess they built Stonehenge, so I guess that isn't so bad. But I found I had to stain them a bit with some earth colored washes to tone down the color. And one thing I learned is that the rocks are always jagged. There's a reason for that. If you use round rocks, they roll off. And that's why ballast is jagged and cuts your feet when you walk on it. That's why these are jagged, but there's a cause why that station was kind of interesting. It was a kit that was sold at a convention. It's actually a convention, a little station that's in Newport, Rhode Island. It was a gardener's shed and part of a cemetery, and eventually became a railroad station. It's still in use by a tourist railroad, so far as I know. And I bought the station kit, and it just never fit there right. No matter what I did, it was too big, and it never worked out. But I had the station kit, and I ended up giving it away, but just showing sometimes that doesn't work. So what I did is I found a little passenger shed, the kind of thing you might find at a crossroad, the trolley stop. And I believe this one, I could have looked it up if I was really ambitious. I believe this one existed on the Long Island Railroad at some sort of little whistle stop. And I just built it all out of styrene.
Yeah.
I built the bench, and if you get styrene strips, you build them like wood. One thing I like about the styrene, this type of work is maddening with wood. You glue things, you let them dry, they fall apart, you pin them, you hold them. These little things you do with styrene, they're quite simple. Once you get back a couple feet, and since they're painted and in reasonably good shape, no one's ever going to tell what the shed is made of, really. But there's the little shed place that fits a lot better. The roof is the roof of the plaster textured patterns, and I use those a lot. They work out very well. You notice in the back and a little bit of perspective. That's an HO scale Walters kit. It's one of the walls left over from a kit bash. There is a Wampanoag. There's no Wampanoag seafood, but there is a Wampanoag campgrounds near me. It's evidently an old Indian tribe that lived in the area. Now, we'll go a little further. Now, I had to have a harbor, I had to have a dock, and I kind of built things like this the old fashioned way with wax paper and pins. Maybe there is another way, but I've never seen it or known about it. But just like when I was a kid, a lot of you look like you're my age, where you got the balsa wood airplanes and the airplane glue and the straight pins, and you pinned the thing down and you stuck all the pieces together. And that's how I built the trestle beds. I make myself my drawings. I cut up some dowels. By the way, you can get we're talking about dollar store. You can get a really inexpensive quarter-inch dowel at the supermarket this time of year. They sell them for s'more skewers. They have these long dowels that I don't think that's nice birch dowels, but they're suitable for what we use, and they're real cheap. You get like 5 of them for $1, and they're about 2.5 feet long, and they work out very well. So those are s'mores. If you don't know this, I guess you know the s'more is the marshmallow and melted chocolate and graham cracker. And then I cut strip wood. I tend to cut my own strip wood. I buy these sheets like Midwest Modeler sells sheets in all thicknesses, like from a 32nd up to I think 3/8 of an inch. And I buy sheets and I cut these on a small micromark table saw for 2 reasons. One reason is anytime I go to the hobby shop, they don't have the size I want. Anytime I go to the hobby shop and buy twice as much as I need, it's never enough. It's no fun to go up to a store, drive half an hour, get something, go home and forget something. This way, whatever I want for wood is just at my disposal. And it's a lot simpler for me. Now down the bottom, there's the abutment for the bridge and a couple of piers to help hold it up. And they're just kind of stained like everybody else does with alcohol and the ink and washers. Now, one thing I like about building a model trestle, you do it just in reverse of a real one. In a real one, they would build the piles, they would build the bents, then they'd lay the deck on top. In this case, I build the deck first. Then I turn it upside down and glue the bents on. Use little squares to make them square. One thing I've noticed is when you use piles and it's in the ocean, there tends not to be cross bracing between them. So I luckily I didn't have to do any cross bracing, and this is all kind of very conventional construction, you know. Now, one thing I did do when the railroad trestle was done, I had to like glue it to the harbor scene. That's before the stones are in. I still had the old station, but I put a nice heavy weight on it just to weight it down until the glue dried. Now, if you've ever played with model bridges, we had to do some of this work in school, but they're incredibly strong. You know, you build, this one does have a couple of braces, but I made a mistake on myself. But anyway, the, these bridges can hold incredible weights. Almost any model bridge will hold, you know, it's phenomenal how well engineered real bridges are. I think the materials scale up to be much stronger, but that block must weigh about 5 pounds or so, but that's holding it down. Now, one thing I was wise about, I spiked the rail to the ties before I put the bents on. So that way it was real easy to get the rail on. In the next scene, you'll see some phenomena from ON30. It looks like when I put it together, it looks like three rail tin plate track, doesn't it, with the rail running down the middle? Now, if you think about it, O, traditional O scale has a 5 foot gauge. It's a little bit wider than normal for whatever reason. I don't know, it's some reason in antiquity. And it's 2.5. So the narrow gauge rail and dual gauge is running right down the middle. So it looks like line L3, looks like scale line L3 rail track. Now, one thing I built, I've seen people build this, but I've never seen a real one. It's sort of it's like a frog with no points. So the standard gauge comes in on the right from the top and goes across, and the narrow gauge joins it from the right on the bottom, and they cross on a frog, but they don't actually switch because one track goes one way, one goes the other way. A couple of guardrails just keep the rail going the right way. And it's kind of unusual bit of track that I built, and I'm not a good track builder, but I think it's fun to build it. So I like building track. I think I have usually pretty good luck with it. Now, after I built the best way I figured to build the dock with the track was I'd build the trestle, then I'd build the dock around it. Now the dock is much lighter, you know, it just holds people up and occasional baggage cart and things. So I started building a dock. Now I really know how to exactly do this. So I started putting it together and I used bottles of paints and things to prop it up. Then when one piece dry, it gets a little easier. Little blue tape holds parts while they dry. And as you get pieces, it gets stronger. Then I laid a deck on it. And again, this is all to most of you model builders, just very conventional work, but it's kind of fun. And this is all wood. It has a planking platform and a railing, and you can see some of the three rail track there. The track runs a little bit further. There's like a part for the passengers and a part for the freight. Then there's a part that tails, and there's a dock on either side. Now, if I go here, I ended up building a crane. Now, I'm always torn between modern railroading and big time railroading and small railroading. So I built a pretty modern steel crane. This is a copy of an HO kit. I don't remember which company makes it, but I had one of the kits and I just copied it. I just built one out of styrene shapes and found a couple of old gears and just built my own, you know, and it's a simple pole crane to use for the dock. And here you can see that whole area is pretty well done now. You know, it has a Bachman 40 running across it, the rocks in place. One thing don't forget if you're doing the ocean is down the bottom, don't forget to have some like greenish moss or barnacles where the tide rises and falls. You know, because it indicates that there's some tide and now there's some junk on it. building in the back to Fieldston, that's a kind of a copy, but let's say a altered copy of a real building. My wife used to go there dancing when she was a young kid. She comes from the South Shore, and the Fieldston was there. And one time they had big bands and everything. And then this is the area. The trains going through. Now, in this particular picture, I put this in partly because that there's no water. And I always tend to do the water at the very end. And I'd like to mention a little bit about modeling water. I've seen people do beautiful effects with ripples and waterfalls and waves and foam and all that stuff. And to me, I've never had much luck with that. I've always had the best luck just texturing the bottom like the land and pouring some sort of varnish or epoxy over it. And I have a reason for this. Now, years ago, I read where Ansel Adams was speaking about photographing the ocean, and he recommended that you use the tripod and a fairly slow speed, so the ocean was slightly blurred, and that kind of implied emotion. And I guess what bothers me about moving water models is that you're in real life and it's frozen, and it should be moving, and you know it should be moving. You can accept that in a photograph because the photograph is essentially a frozen thing. I don't know if that makes sense, but I've always just modeled still water, and I live near the ocean, and the ocean could be anywhere from crashing up and throwing rocks at those buildings to calm as a reflection pond. So I always make it that way just to be easy, and it's simpler too for me. Now, here's a finished picture with the water in it, and there's Situate Harbor with the dock and a couple of pictures looking up. And by the way, the skies, I think I mentioned this last time. I use real pictures of real skies. I usually have a camera now with a cell phone. Everybody's has a camera with them all the time, and they have pretty good lenses now and high resolution. And if I see an interesting sky, I photograph it. I have a file with hundreds of sky pictures, and I'll drop them in. You know, if I have a minute, I'll like. Do I have a minute to editorialize about that too, or am I running late?
You're running a little late, but go ahead.
Okay, just quickly. Years ago, a fellow in the model railroad the photo contest did a photograph where he photoshopped the sky, and it was like sacrilege. You know, this is awful. How can you do that? Then somebody else puts a photograph up in the back and photographs with the photograph, but that's all right. You know, and I never saw the difference. But I blatantly Photoshop and do what I can. And it's funny. I thought I was going to be well under 15 minutes, but I guess I really just know when to stop talking.
You do great.
I hope you enjoyed my little Situate Harbor scene. And
I think it's going to be fantastic.
I
really do. It's beautifully done, Mike.
Well, thank you.
Anybody have any questions for Mike? Well, I'm surprised, Mike. It's really
just questioning, Mike. What did you use for your water again?
I usually use the 2 equal parts epoxy.
Epoxy.
The common one is Envirotex.
Yep.
And Castolite, and I found you can get that stuff fairly cheaply at craft stores like Michael's and AC Moore, stuff like that.
Yep, Envirotex. Okay. Oh, yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anybody else?
Well,
Mike,
I need to
Mike, thanks so very much. I really do appreciate your time this evening. See you next week.
I hope so. Well, I'll probably join and watch you guys for a while.